Good evening. I'm Dan Burkove, the founder of Sam's Hill Anglos. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this evening's shiur, featuring Rabbi Chaim Brovender, speaking on the topic of Orthodoxy and the Non-Orthodox. We have an hour for the shiur, and after Rabbi Brovender's presentation, there'll be Q&A. Before beginning, I'd like to thank Dr. Abby Lazar for her tremendous help in organizing tonight's session. I'd also like to thank the GSC, the Givat Shmuel community, for its support. I'd like to mention that the shiur is dedicated to the memory of my father, Lawrence Burkove, Yitzhak Leib ben Zvi HaKohen, Zichrono Livracha. Rabbi Brovender is one of today's most accomplished and revolutionary teachers of Judaism. He founded and leads several institutions that provided the tools and the love for learning Torah to students of all walks of life, and in particular to those whose education, their Jewish education, did not reach the level of their secular education. He also created the first institution to teach Gemara to women, which in itself was a watershed event. These days, however, such initiatives are commonplace, and much of that is thanks to Rabbi Brovender's pioneering work. And in 2007, Rabbi Brovender went high-tech. He created the WebYeshiva, which brings some of the best teachers of Torah to students all around the world, with utilizing the speed and the reach of the internet. I had the great fortune to be a student of Rabbi Brovender for several years, and like many others, I credit Rabbi Brovender for giving me the best education I ever received. I've also been very fortunate that Rabbi Brovender was my Masada Kedushin. He married my wife and me, and he was a sandak to one of my children, and for this I will always be grateful. This makes for me welcoming Rabbi Brovender that much more special. Rabbi Brovender, please, the mic, the stender is yours.
Thanks. I'd like to reiterate, this shiur is a shiur. It's going to be a shiur. It's dedicated in honor of Lawrence Burkove, Dan's father, Yitzhak Leib ben Zvi HaKohen, Zichrono Livracha. If you have trouble hearing what I'm saying, grin and bear it. I have no options. You know, there's been a lot of talk recently about adding a place at the Kotel where people could daven, men and women could daven together, spearheaded by some Reform Jews. And I'd like to look into that. I thought about it. So what do I think about that? What do I think about that? I mean, after all, I'm not opposed to people davening. And I know that people daven in different ways. Everybody who davens thinks they're pleasing God and pleasing themselves. I don't think anybody could argue them out of it. So I was thinking to myself, well, what do I think about it? Not that anybody's asked me, thankfully. Who knows, I might think it's a good idea. That would be really terrible. So I have these people, they come and they say, we want to daven mixed. So we say, no, you can't daven mixed. You can only daven the way we daven. But we don't mean that. We mean as long as they come to the Kotel, separate, men here and women there, we don't really care what they do at the Kotel. You know, we don't really question their ability to daven. So I wondered, is there a position Is there a Jewish position or a Torah position, people like to say today? Is there a Torah position about people who are not Orthodox davening in the way they daven someplace at the Kotel? So immediately I realized that I didn't have a clue about the answer. So I looked around, and I still didn't have a clue. But suddenly, in a miraculous fashion, the parsha of Vayishlach came up. You know, today is Sunday, right? Yesterday, Vayishlach. It just came up. I said, okay, I don't know the answer to the question, but the least I can do is go over the parsha. Right? So in the parsha, there are two wondrous stories that I noticed. I mean, you don't have to follow everything I say. But there were two wondrous stories. One was about Dinah, and the other was about Esav. Now, first I want to tell you about Dinah. I mean, she's not such, a superstar in the Bible. But she does have something to say. She has something to say. So I'll tell you what she says, but I might have to just take off my glasses. You won't mind, will you? Because amongst the other things that don't work, my eyes don't work either. So, one second, I have it written down here. Vayakam balayla, who? Yitzhak. Get up. You know Yaakov is meeting with Esav. You remember that story from yesterday? Not from last year, just from yesterday. Vayakam balayla hu vayikach et shtei nashav ve'et shtei shivchotav. He took his two wives and he took his two, I don't know, let's say concubine because it has 3 syllables. What it is they were different kind of wives. Wives was a general category, and you could be like this kind of wife and that kind of wife. So he had different kinds of wives, which, he seemed to have that under control somehow. And he took 11 children. He set them up, for Esav. He set them up. And he went across this river that had a name. We're not into that. But rivers could have names, right? No? There's a river in Manitoba. There's a river in Manitoba called the Brovender River. It's on the maps. It's amazing what a name can do. It made me feel so good. So there's Rashi. Rashi says this. Vedina hechanaita. What do you mean she had 11 children? We know she had a daughter. He had a daughter. Her name was Dinah. Dinah hechanaita. Natna nitana beteva v'na'al befaneha. What do you think of that? Yaakov took Dinah and put her in a box, and he locked the box up. This reminds us of Avraham Avinu and Sarah, but the context is a little bit different. We don't know exactly what's going on here. Right? Shelo yitain ba Esav einav. In order to make sure that Esav doesn't, look at her and think, wow, what an opportunity. Shelo yitain ba Esav einav v'lekach ne'enash Yaakov. Rashi, quoting the Medrash, he says, as a result of this action that Yaakov took, ne'enash, he was punished. Shemina'a me'achiv, נענש יעקב שמנעיו מאחיו. He prevented her from being part of the brothers. Shema tachzirena lamutav v'nefla biyad Shechem. Now listen again. Shemina'a me'achav. Achiv is Esav. He didn't let her have anything to do with Esav, and so he was punished. Why was he punished? Why was he punished? He would, in Israel today, he would get a commendation. A letter of commendation for the Rosh Memshalah. It had nothing to do with Esav. So what does Rashi say? Shelo yitain ba Esav einav v'lakach ne'enash Yaakov. And so Yaakov was punished for putting her into a box and keeping her away from Esav. Shemina'a me'achiv. He, Yaakov, prevented her, Dinah, from having anything to do with Esav, like marrying him. And so he was punished. Why was he punished? Shema tachzirenu lamutav. Maybe she would convince him to do tshuva, to become a Baal tshuva, because she might convince him to become a Baal tshuva, so he was punished. Oh. Now that it doesn't matter whether you think that's what really happened or not. It's not the way you learn Chazal. Chazal said something that means they had this idea. They had this idea that people could affect each other, and that they should try to affect each other. And it may even be that if you prevent somebody from protecting your ideas and imposing them on somebody else, you should be punished for that. That's a remarkable idea. It's remarkable. Now everybody knows. I remember in the yeshiva, it was more than one time, somebody asked me, we have so-and-so in the family who's this or that or the other thing, fill in the blanks. Can I invite him to my house because he'll have a bad effect on my children? Usually I thought to myself, I couldn't have a worse effect than the parents are having on their children. You know. But that was like a question. The question, so the answer is in Rashi. The answer is Rashi. If you think your children are going to make him a better person, invite him. If you think your children are going to be seduced by him, don't invite him. The trouble is, who knows? Who knows in a particular case? In a particular case, who knows? I mean, you could go to all the experts or people who hang out shingles out of their doors and say, I'm an expert in human relations of one kind or another. But it's not always, doesn't always work out. Doesn't always work out. So Dinah represents for us this idea that you have responsibility. That you have responsibility, but the responsibility works both ways. You can't just be a Chabadnik. I mean, you can, but you can't be indiscriminate about what you're doing. And even though everybody in Am Yisrael deserves another chance, everybody, I mean, you have to be optimistic. You can't say the door is closed. It'll never be the way it's supposed to be. No. It might be. And you might be the agent. You might be able to do it. Right? But Yaakov said, I might be able to do it. Dinah might be able to do it, but I'm not going to let her. I'm not going to let her do it. That's the way Rashi understands the story. Doesn't mean, like I said, doesn't mean that that's the story. The story is what's written in the Torah. That's the story. But Chazal told you an impression they had. They said, look, people are not the same. Not all the people are good. Not all the people have... I mean, in all the generations of what you call Jewish machshava is a word that they like here in Israel, and you may have heard it in the past. Machshava assumes thinking. But in fact, it's not that way. Machshava usually means I read a text and I believe it. which doesn't seem to me to be machshava, but each to his own, as they say. So Dina teaches us that there's a chance, there's a hope, something could happen positively. Something could happen positively. This. The question is, you think a Reformed Jew, like a Reformed Jew, is worse than Esau? I doubt it. It was to be, in the olden days, 150 years ago when the Reform started, it was kind of a breakaway from Orthodoxy, of a certain kind of Orthodoxy. I mean, after all, Reform started by doing things that today everybody does. For example, the Reformers, they decided to speak to the congregation, the drasha or whatever it was called, in the vernacular. So that was considered to be a breach of confidence of the highest order. But today, everybody speaks in the vernacular, even people who look like they have a special bond with an angel in heaven, they also speak in the vernacular. So things change. You have to think about it. Today, however, most people who go to Reform synagogues never went to another different kind of synagogue. I mean, that's how they are. They know Reform. They don't know anything else. So are they worse than Esau? Would you let them talk to Dina, make their position known? That's the first thing in the parasha that helps me to understand something about the problem. But the second thing in the parasha is Esav. Remember Esav? Esav, he was Yaakov's twin brother. He didn't like Yaakov. He forced Yaakov to lie about getting a blessing from his father. Eventually, Esav said, I'm going to kill him. And he had to run away. And he spent 20 years with Lavan. 20 years, a long time. He ended up with 2 wives and 2 concubines and a bunch of children. And somehow he got away because HaKadosh Baruch Hu helped him. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, now's the time, you've got to get out of here. And he did. So I said to myself, why do I need all of this? Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu invent Esav? After all, Avram Avinu didn't have children for a long time. And then he had a son, Yitzhak. He had another son from a different wife, so somehow that's discounted. It was a mistake. Yitzhak also had difficulty in having children. And he davened, and his wife Rivka davened, and the davening did something, the implication being that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was responsible. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was doing it. So what would be so difficult for HaKadosh Baruch Hu not to have Esav? I mean, what do we need Esav for? What did he do that helps me, a Jew, thousands of years later, who's trying to do desperately the right thing? What am I supposed to do about Esav? Do you know that the Ramban, in his introduction to the parasha, the Ramban says, this is, he doesn't say these words, but I'm putting it together with a different Ramban at the beginning of Perek Yud Bet in Bereshit. This is Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim. What's Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim? That what the Avot, like you could say, I'll ask the question this way. What makes an Av an Av? What makes an Av an Av? Why do we call them Avot? What do they have that's different than anybody else? I mean, Moshe Rabbeinu, he could have been an Av. He was pretty significant. David HaMelech, he was pretty significant in terms of our conception of things, the way we think about them. So the answer of the Ramban is Maaseh Avot Siman Lebanim, that the Avot was special. Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov was special because they created a path, using the word path like they used to use in computers. I don't know what they do today, but there's a path. You had a program, and the program made the computer little bug run around in a certain way and came out the way it should. So Maaseh Avot Siman Lebanim is the Avot created a path for me. I'm that way because Avram was that way. I'm that way because Yitzchak was that way. And if you learn Kabbalah, you don't have to be a Kabbalist to learn Kabbalah. You can learn Kabbalah because you like to learn. Believe me, it's absolutely possible. So the Ramban said that Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov are Avot. Avot means they created the path that we are to go on. At the beginning of this parasha Vayishlach, the Ramban says, it's a struggle. It's a struggle, Yaakov and Esau. It's a struggle that goes on and on. And it's important. It's the way we are. It's almost as though the Ramban says, you know that story about Dinah? Well, it's a struggle. Who's right and who's wrong? And when do you do this and when do you do that? And that's the struggle between Yaakov and Esau. There is a struggle. And the struggle is because the answers are not always clear, simple, and obvious. But sometimes, I grant you that I don't really know, but that doesn't mean that I don't have to address it, that I can hide, that I can say, let's forget about it until something exciting happens. I can't really do that. And that's Yaakov and Esau. That's Yaakov and Esau. We know that on Yom Kippur, I mean, this is not a powerful proof, but I mean, it shows something again about the feeling that we have. B'yeshiva shel Malo, b'yeshiva shel Mata, the Matirim, Litpalel im Havaryanim. Imagine that is based on a Mordechai in Yuma. It's like not a very kind of obvious source. But Litpalel im Havaryanim, that's Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the day of Litpalel im Havaryanim. When the Kohen Gadol went up to the Kodesh Kodashim, and he wanted to say vidui, confession. So what did he say? Me, my family, my people, all of us. There was nobody who was excluded. Even though everybody had a different cheshbon, there was a different reckoning for everybody in heaven. And doesn't mean that everybody's the same, but it means that everybody's in. Everybody's in, and that creates responsibility. That's Yaakov and Esau. Yaakov and Esau, they're in according to the Ramban. According to the Ramban, they're both in. They're both in. So, what about us? We have a problem. We have a problem with the kotel. People want to daven. Can I say no to people who want to daven? I mean, okay, they could daven where I daven. They don't want to. They're used to something. They were brought up with something. I mean, after all, there are a lot of non-religious Jews in Israel, you may have noticed. I've always said that, when I came in Aliyah in 1965, I came in Aliyah in 1965. That was it was sort of old prehistory, but we still had pencils and paper and all that kind of stuff. So, so I came in Aliyah because I was totally captivated by Bnei Akiva. Whatever they told me, that's what I was willing to do. I mean, I took a little time out to go to school and finish this and finish that and get married. I had nothing to do, so I knew where I was going. I was going to Israel. So I got to Israel, I said, gee, you know, no one ever told me that there are Arabs who live here. Just like it was a total surprise. So I had to stop and think about things over again. Well, I thought I knew everything that there was to know. That's always distressing. That's always distressing. So I think that the problem, there's a problem in Israel. It has to do with the rabbinate, kashrus. It has to do with different things that in America we solved because we had to solve them. In America, there's a separation of church and state. Now, I don't know exactly how that works out in every case, but I mean, it means that the people who want to be religious, want to be connected to each other through religious demands, they do it on their own. They become the religion. But they're not the state religion. There's no such thing, and that's the way I grew up, and that seemed to me to be very normal and very simple. I don't understand why people here think that the Rabbanut is very important for marriages and divorces. All over the world there are rabbis who do marriages and divorces without having authorization of a government. But I mean, maybe I'll understand that someday and Dan will invite me back. But when it comes to the Kotel, the problem with the Kotel, as I see it, is that it belongs to the state of Israel. I mean, after all, the army captured it and took it and reconstituted it and rebuilt it. It belongs to the state of Israel. So what you're actually asking is that the state should make a decision about how to daven. And that seems silly to me. We have a lot of people who know about davening. Probably some of them sitting here. Why would the state be empowered to make that decision? So I don't want the state to make that decision. On the other hand, I think there's at least partial ownership that behooves the people who actually go to daven there. I mean, if you actually go to daven, so that's a kind of ownership, isn't it? I mean, and since all the people who go to daven there every day are of a certain type of orthodoxy, I don't see how you could upset that by giving it away to another group. I mean, would you give the Kotel away to a bunch of Japanese? I doubt it. So the people who don't go to daven at the Kotel and were not basically not participating in the army, the Israeli army, I don't see that they have much of a claim. Does that mean they couldn't work it out somehow in a process that's peaceful? Of course they could, they might, but you know, everything in Israel, you know, listening to the news in Israel as I do at 6 o'clock in the morning is always exciting. It's always something terrible that's just happened, you know. It's just unbelievable, you know. I remember in America, I used to listen to the news at 7 in the morning. So we talk about a dog escaped from a kennel in Houston, Texas, you know. That's America. But Israel, try it. 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. Try it. So it's hard in Israel to get a commonality of agreement about things, which is what this would really need. And I don't see that it's going to happen in the near future. So I think that if there was an agreement about making an area for people to daven who want to daven in a different way, I don't think that would be a bad thing. And I just don't think that that's what's going to happen. So, you know, they say Israel, it's a startup. You know, maybe it'll figure it out, and maybe it'll work out. Hopefully it will. And I haven't got a lot more to say about this topic. So I'm stopping. Now everybody here is supposed to ask me a question. I mean, you don't have to ask me the same question. You can ask me different questions.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Brovender. Questions? Jimmy.
Hi, Rabbi Brovender.
Take up the
Sure, first. I just want to say, I think
What's your name?
my name is Shimmy Marcus.
Shimmy Marcus?
Yeah.
Oh.
I think I speak on behalf of the entire congregation that we're very honored to have you. A lot of us have been influenced by your Torah in one way or another, so it's really an honor that Rabbi Brovender has.
I'm not interested in retiring, Shimmy.
What's that? I'm sorry.
Thank you, though. Thank you.
With that said, I am somewhat disappointed in the approach that the Rabbi has laid out this evening, only because I think that when we approach these types of topics as halachic Jews, we want to always come at it with a basis hilchati and whatever we decide in these types of matters. And you know, I not to be cynical towards other groups of Jews, but certainly I don't think that when the Rabbanut or the Haredi populations or the Haredi folks can come to this, they are also armed with plenty of meta-halachic narratives and tools to sort of bolster their case, me'al u'me'ever from the Basis Halacha.
Uh-huh.
Don't you feel that a return, doesn't the Rav feel that a return to a pure halachic discussion on this might help foster a greater unity of understanding around what needs to be done in these areas?
Well, if it had not yet been done, then I would say yes. But since I think that the case has been presented many times by different rabbinic personalities, I think that's what was done. But it led ultimately to name calling. You are a this or you are a that. And I'm not sure that that was a halachic response. But yes, if there would be a new halachic response, that would be good. I would come to listen to the shiur.
I'm sorry?
I would come to listen to the shiur.
Abby?
Hi, Rabbi Brovender, very honored also as Shimmy.
What's your name?
I'm Abby Lazar. Thank you very much for...
Do I know you?
I don't think we have met until this evening. I wanted to ask the Rav about feelings of Judaism's view of secular holidays.
Which?
Thanksgiving, for one, which many of us will be celebrating this week. So I wanted to know what your feelings are about Jews as a whole celebrating institutions which are inherently secular.
Look, I didn't say I was going to answer questions about anything. I mean, you know, for me it didn't work. When I came to Israel and Thanksgiving rolled around, I said, it seems to me that Thanksgiving is a non-Jewish holiday that is organized by the non-Jews who paid some Indians for Manhattan. That's the way I learned the story. But since that time, a lot of American olim have indicated a great preference for Thanksgiving. Like it's a wondrous day that we have to celebrate. So I'm not going to tell people not to celebrate, but I have not yet joined in. And I know Rav Moshe said what Rav Moshe said, you know. I don't get it. I think in Israel we have a lot of opportunities to create happy days and to remind ourselves of some sad ones. Unfortunately, that's the way it is living in Israel. It's a tense place, and things happen that are often sad and sometimes joyous. And I think we should work on promoting those days in a better way. Well, I don't know what the better way is, but I think there's always a better way if you work at it. So I don't know, is there anything else besides Thanksgiving that fits into that category? I think, for example, Chanukah is celebrated in Israel. It's not, to the best of my recollection, celebrated in Chutz La'aretz. You know, Chanukah, everybody's working, they come home late. And I remember my father, Zichrono Livracha. He came home late at night, they lit the Chanukah menorah on a table because there was no window that was appropriate. And, I mean, he did the mitzvah, but it wasn't a big deal. Here, it's a big deal. So we should try to make it a big deal of significance and not just a big deal. I don't see how Thanksgiving fits into that model, but obviously other people disagree with me.
Well, the notion of giving thanks and just a holiday to, I think a lot of people will eat their turkey and
We say Mizmor LeTodah every day.
right, but that's, I don't know, I guess it's
I mean, you could make something out of it.
right.
You know,
You said it at your Thanksgiving.
The Gemara says that when all is said and done and the Beit HaMikdash is built, just have the Korban Todah. That's all you're going to bring. Didn't say we're going to bring trinkets to Indians in Manhattan Island. But maybe, again, I can't get into it. I can't get into it, but I can't get into birthdays either. So maybe there's something wrong with me. Because I think just because Paro had a birthday, I should have a birthday. I mean, I have a birthday, but I don't have to make a party out of it. Because Paro made a party out of it. I mean, I don't get it. But okay, there again, I may be against Rav Moshe. So I don't want to be against it.
Yeah.
So I take it back. Yeah. I may not be able to hear you.
I'll speak up.
What?
Schumann, can you hear me?
Come a little closer.
Okay. Come a little closer.
We'll give you a seat in the back.
Can you hear me now?
Great.
Well, say something.
My question is regarding standards, right?
Regarding?
Standards. It might be my South African accent that you're not used to, but
You have to come a little closer, I'm sorry.
regarding standards, we have historically, I think you might have mentioned this, that religious curiosity in Israel, at least, was sort of handed over to the Haredi community to determine what standards were, and there's a certain, if we're taking the issue of the Kotel and we expand it to general terms of reform and progressiveness of halacha changes over time, is there, and with the ability of people, with more people to have access to text and learn and to understand and to potentially find ways to make things mutar, is there a requirement, or is there is there a in at some point saying, okay, we have a certain standard of what halakha is, or we have a certain standard of what, how we understand halakha, or how we perform Judaism, and at that point we should try lishmor, to conserve that standard, because it can be a certain runaway event where with anyone can really, there's a lot of London, there's a lot of people who learn and understand things very, very well, and can sort of manipulate texts in a way that they feel that they want to take halacha. That's my question. Standards. Is there an essence or importance to having standards?
No.
Thank you.
Are you gone? You heard my answer?
Why?
Look, as long as more and more people every year are convinced that the demands of halakha, as they are seen by the great poskim of our generation, are significant, then why should it change? The people who want it to change are the people who have some sort of ta'ana. There's a better way. But most of the people, I think today, who accept halachic authority are pretty happy with the situation. Even though there's some things that are hard to understand, but okay. So there are hard things to understand in every area of life and things we do. So I don't think that there's an opening. I don't think there's an opening. There is an attempt. There are attempts sometimes for groups of people who are a little bit different, but they don't seem to be particularly successful. And right now, the people who want to accept the halachic kind of limits seem to be the majority of those people, right? I mean, people who are not interested in halakha, I don't think you were talking about them. But the people who are interested in halakha seem to be quite content with accepting the more stringent positions. Seems to me. This is not, I didn't do a real count, but that's what I think.
What's the right education for a Jewish child? Should a child just study Jewish topics? Or should a Jewish child study secular topics like math, English, and literature? And if it's okay to study secular topics as well, what's the right balance between the two?
Well, that's a pretty easy question, Dan. I'm surprised you asked it. I mean, the answer is obvious. I haven't got an idea. But I can tell you things that are interesting. The other things that are interesting, I know a lot about, for example, boys in the Haredi system of education, where you only learn one thing. Just one thing that you learn. But it seems that if they make the decision at the age 20 or 22 to go into something else, they're able to do it without a lot of difficulty. And people who study math, I studied math when I was in high school and in college. When you study math, you have to. Like they make you study trigonometry. You know about trigonometry? I mean, why somebody who's going to be an executive in a food company has to go through the terror of studying trigonometry is beyond me. Open-mindedness means something else to me. It means like if you find something you're interested in, you could pursue it. You could learn about it. But you don't learn about things in order to find out whether you're interested in any of them. That seems to me to be somewhat counterindicated. But education, like everything else, is very complicated. Depends on the people you're talking about, how qualified they are, how talented they are, how knowledgeable they are, how they are able to do things easily or with great difficulty. So all that goes into the mix. And when you say, is it important to learn other things? Yeah, of course it's important to learn other things. What other things? Is it important to know about the French Revolution? Is it important to be able to say something in some kind of a French word at the proper moment? Is that so important? I mean, do you lose out a lot if you can't do that? So I would say you have to ask that question to somebody else, and if the answer is good, you'll tell me what it is.
Well,
Okay, ready? I know the perils of asking a klutz kasha, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Chas v'shalom.
No, I've done it. So you mentioned the issue of marriage and divorce.
The what?
Marriage and divorce,
Yeah.
and that it's controlled by the state. So Dan mentioned French, so I'm going to throw in a Latin term, status quo. And so, I mean, the person who really set all of the status quo things was Rav Herzog. And we're still sort of stuck in that place from 1947, the agreements that were made. Do we change the status quo? Do we, does that just slippery slope? And what about the Rabbanut? The Rabbanut, we went from Rav Kook to Rav Herzog. What was that? We went from a Kohen, a Levi, a Yisrael, and then I don't have to say the rest, but the
Convicted felons.
a convicted felon. Yes, not every Rav Rashi is such, but we have a problem. I mean, is the institutionalization of the Rabbanut, is it good for us anymore, and is there an alternative?
I don't know. I think that if today the question was, should there be a Rabbanut Rashit in Israel, or should we do it ad hoc, I think the ad hoc side would win easily. I think it's always more difficult to do away with an agency, even if that agency is not performing particularly well, or even if you would argue that there's really no point to having it, it doesn't really do anything that you want or that you need. It's not so easy to do away with it. So again, it needs a negotiation. What's happening now may be something of a negotiation, that kashrut might go into the public area, and marriage and divorce could certainly, or marriage certainly could go public, as it's everything in Israel is special, because if you get married, anybody can get married any way you want in Israel. But in order to get registered in Mishrad HaPnim, the Rabbanut has to agree that you're married. So that's an annoyance. I mean, what's one thing got to do with the other? What if it's like two non-Jews get married in Israel to each other? So then the Mishrad HaPnim will register them as married for purposes of divorce and not divorce, purpose of inheritance, for example. I mean, the fact that we have a Rabbanut Rashit, which is a function of something happened with the Turks years ago, looks good, but may not be so good. And what to do about it is difficult. I mean, it may be that lowering the level of the people who are in that office will be helpful. Rav Kook was Rav Rashi. The thought was that he had a spiritual weightiness to him, which might have an effect. And they said, there's that story that the Rav told, that when he came to Israel, he went to Kinneret, to the kibbutz Kinneret, And after they did whatever they did, they asked him to come and eat something with them, the people on the kibbutz. So I guess the Rav told them, this part I don't know, told them he can't eat because it's not kosher. They said, no, it's kosher here. Everything, we have a kosher kitchen. We're not Shomer Shabbat, but we have a kosher kitchen. So the Rav said, how come? Like, why do you have a kosher kitchen? So he said, years ago, Rav Kook visited. Remember, Rav Kook went on this famous sojourn around the north of Israel to various places, including several kibbutzim. Rav Kook sat down afterwards. He went with Yitzhak Chaim Brovender. They went together, and Rav Kook had food that he had in a bag. He opened up the bag, and he started to eat. And afterwards, he talked to the people, and he said, I hope that the next time I come, I'll be able to eat. And as a result, apparently, at least the way the story is told, they decided to have a kosher kitchen in the hope that Rav Kook would come back, which I don't think he was able to do. But Rav Kook had there was this idea that he was a person of great spiritual weightiness, and that as the Rav Rashi, he would, and also it was true about Reb Herzog also. Same thing is, so the Rabbanut Rashit maybe perhaps made sense in those days, because that's what you were looking for. Today it's mostly administrative. It's something that is not particularly encouraging. So yeah, maybe. I mean, I wouldn't be unhappy if there was no Rabbanut Rashit. I mean, they have in America. We have Rabbanim who are knowledgeable and take it seriously and do what has to be done. And people in America get married, and if they have to, they get divorced. Nobody ever who says anything about it. You know, Ivanka Trump, she had to become Jewish, she became Jewish. That you know about, right? Okay, it's been a pleasure. I'll see you around. Maybe not. Be well.
Thank you.